Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We are going back to our Byzantine school. So this is going to be part 3. So we have looked at Aldus Manutius, and we're going to continue with Aldus. And so some of you have contacted me and said you're very interested in this material. Now, there is a very interesting YouTuber called Ross King. Now, he's written a few books. So we're going to go through one of his videos. It goes for 35 minutes. And he talks a lot about Aldus Manutius. And so I'll read this little blurb that he's put here. Now, what's the best way to repay Ross King? Well, just go and subscribe, like his material, which I'm going to do right now. I should have done earlier. And yeah, I guess that's really all we can do. He's had nearly 2,000 views on this video. It's only 2 years old. And as you can see down the list here, he's got Renaissance discoveries, Plato, Latin, the printing press, the Venetian ghetto, the Homeric text. So we're going to look at a lot of these videos over time as we're going through the material to do with the Greek text and the Byzantine school that was around Erasmus. And so we're going to be directly looking at Erasmus. We do that quite a fair bit, but we will be looking at people around Erasmus and who his influences were, because this gives us a better picture. I mean, if you just looked at someone like Martin Luther and you didn't look at those who were surrounding him, you could get a skewed view of why he did certain things. And so he had a lot of interaction with different people. And so I'm just going to go through and start this now. Pastor Brett is in the house. Good morning, Nick, he says. So it's 10:20 at night here. And so Boulders and Lion says, I was just thinking about you earlier, wondering if you lost your voice. And so, yeah, I was doing a video against Gail Ripplinger's material about the 2023 edition. And my voice was getting hoarser and hoarser. And I was sort of laughing to myself on the inside because that was one of the accusations against, was it Don Wilkins on the Ankerberg show, that he lost his voice. And you know, lots of King James only books have this. He lost his voice, and you know, some of these translators are judged by God, you know, and all this stuff. And I was just thinking, no, it was actually concrete dust from this wall that we had to get this concrete dust off this wall. And you know, usually you'd wear a dust mask or something, and I didn't, and just got a throat full of that stuff. And so that's why I was like that. But no doubt this will give Gail Ripplinger something else to write about and talk about. So Boulders Alliance says, good morning, Pastor Brett, how are you? And good evening. So what do we have lined up? So I have solidified that it is confirmed that we have a debate about the Apocrypha. So David Sokal Preston, he is going to be debating Jonathan Sheffield. So I thought this was a very good match in a sense where Jonathan Sheffield is an Anglican guy. So he pays homage to those people who read the Apocrypha. You know, people like Lancelot Andrews and others, they read the Apocrypha and said, look, you know, we read it not as scripture, but you know, we read it believing that there are certain truths in it and all this sort of stuff. And so I really thought it was a good match. And so it's going to be an interesting debate. Now, another person that we have coming on the program, he contacted me this morning, Australian time, which I guess was nighttime for him. But we have Nehemiah Gordon coming on. So Nehemiah is not a Christian, he's a Jewish guy. But he's written quite a lot about the name of Jehovah, the name of Yahweh, the concepts or the etymology of Jehovah, the 3 I Ams. He's written a lot about even Codex Vaticanus. So it's going to be very interesting. So I would encourage you guys, no matter which side of the fence you're on, because I see TurretinFan is in the house. I'm also one of the people interested in this material. Yeah, good to see you, TurretinFan, Pastor Brett. And so, yeah, any of you guys got any ideas or questions and things? Because I've watched a fair bit of his material, but not everything. Some people have been following him for years. I haven't been following, where I've more so just become really fascinated in the Revelation 16:5 material, Jehovah material, and just jumping around different videos to do with that. And so I guess over the next whenever he wants to do the interview, I left it up to him. So whenever I do have to go to Pakistan on October 1st for 3 weeks. So I'll be away. And then, so if he might want to do it after that. So I'm just leaving it in his hands, because he's obviously a busy guy as a scholar. So he doesn't have time to sort of just be floating around doing, interviews willy-nilly sort of thing, like me, just yabbling on YouTube and stuff like that. But he has a lot of really good things to say. So let me know questions. I asked about Codex Vaticanus, and he said he is still, I guess you would call it under, there is a special word for it, but it's sort of like your muzzle. You can't really say too much because he's studied a certain field, and I guess you have to write confidentiality agreements and things like that. And so he can't speak about certain things, and that's fine. But there's plenty that he can speak on. And so that'll be really interesting. So we've got some, like, 2 interesting things coming up. Now, I'm sort of in a bit of limbo with the debate between Matt Singleton, and he has someone who he wants to debate. And so I'm just waiting for these dates to be solidified, because I'm waiting for Jonathan Sheffield. He's going to say yay or nay to a certain date, and then Nehemiah Gordon. And so obviously, if I make a date with Matt's debate, it could be one of the chosen ones that these other guys want to do their material on. So I've just got to be mindful of that. So I'm just I've got 3 things in the air at the moment, just juggling those. But apart from that, let's get straight into this material. So yeah, I'll read this. He's written, Aldus Manutius was one of the greatest printers in history and an outstanding pioneer of information technology. Working in Venice in the 1490s and early 1500s, he saw the first publication of the complete works of Plato and Aristotle in Greek. His goal was to put the best wisdom of the ages in the hands of all readers, and to make the reading experience as pleasing and convenient as possible. He is the inventor of the inexpensive small format book, of the italic font, and even of the comma and semicolon. He was also the publisher of one of the world's most beautiful, most valuable, and most mysterious books, the Hypertomachia Polyphili. I probably said that wrong, but that's a mouthful. Aldus believed that a world of readers would be a better place. In this video, we learn about his life at the very heart of the Italian Renaissance, a time of curiosity and exploration, but also, in his words, a tumultuous and sad time of war and destruction. It is against the tapestried background that we celebrate his wonderful dream of using the latest technology to save the world's precious intellectual heritage. So I'm going to put this into Google Translate. Here we go. I guess it would be in Latin. No wonder I said it wrong. It should have been that. Okay, well, hopefully we'll be able to say that after a few more of these lessons. It'll just be rolling off our tongue. So let's get straight into this. Sorry, guys. As usual, no sound. It's just I just have to do that every video, and it just keeps you guys on your toes. I actually do it on purpose. It's to keep you guys on your toes, just so that you will. I just see who's paying attention, because if no one tells me, I'm like, well, they're actually not paying attention.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ross King. This is Renaissance Discoveries, and in this episode, we are in Venice. I want to take us back, as always, more than 500 years. In this episode, to the day in about 1490, when a 40-year-old schoolmaster arrives in Venice. He's the native of a small town in southern Italy, and for the past 2 decades, he's been mixing in learned circles and teaching Greek and Latin to young aristocrats. But by 1490, he has a dream. He wants to become a publisher. He wants to print books that people will actually read, that they'll read for pleasure, and that will be available to everyone. He wants to spread the wisdom of ancient authors such as Plato and Aristotle, and therefore make the world a better place. He's come to Venice because Venice is the capital of printing and publishing. 1 in 8 books, more than 12% of all books published in Europe between the 1450s and 1490s was published here. So it was a good time and good place to turn up. And this middle-aged school teacher, a man calling himself Aldus Manutius, turns out to be exactly the right man. He would become one of the most important printers and publishers in history, one of the most important guys in the history of information technology, the man who would print the complete works of both Plato and Aristotle and many others in Greek.
And so one of the main reasons I'm looking at Aldus is because he was very influential on Erasmus. And so Erasmus was a proofreader in Aldus's print shop for about 9 months. And so he was proofreading through Greek documents. And Erasmus lived with Aldus for that time. And so what I want you to get into your mind is when we're talking, because oftentimes we'll talk about Erasmus. Erasmus has been demonized by the post-Reformation Catholics. They saw what had happened with Erasmus's material, and they put all of his books on the forbidden list. And we also see that modern text critics oftentimes just have low blows and a really poor evaluation of Erasmus's life, that oftentimes they're just trying to demonize him, trying to make out that he's some sort of coward, or, you know, he's just fumbling around. He didn't really know what he was doing. Or, you know, oftentimes I'll hear James White say things like, well, Erasmus, he wasn't really interested in Greek. You know, his main focus was the Latin. You know, just these type of comments, but that when you examine them, you realize that Erasmus dedicated about 20 years of his life to Greek. So he was interested in that. It's just one of these sayings that just sort of makes you feel like, well, Erasmus, it was just an afterthought. He didn't really care about it. But it's a bit like saying, well, you know, James White wrote a book about Roman Catholics. And so he's written a book about the LGBT community recently, but that was an afterthought. You know, sort of, it's like, how can you evaluate someone's work as just an afterthought, especially a language, you know, so being the leading world expert in Latin and in Greek. How can you just say, well, he preferred this one over the other or anything like that? I think he loved both languages. And so
the man who dedicated his life to what he called the advantage of humanity, who gave the world, among other things, the comma and the semicolon. And he was the man who was crucial to the period of technological innovation and intellectual inquiry that we call the Renaissance.
Okay, so he invented the comma. So I'll just type in comma. we'll just go to Wikipedia articles and things like that. So it's not going to be overly in depth, but so we see the history in third century. The Aristophanes of Byzantium invented a single system of single dots, thesis, at varying levels, which separated verses and indicated the amount of breath needed to complete each fragment of the text when reading aloud. The different lengths were signified by a dot at the bottom, middle, or top of the line. For a short passage, a comma in the form of a dot was placed at mid-level. So sometimes you'll be reading through your Greek New Testament, you'll see these dots. This is the origin of the concept of the comma, although the name came to be used for the mark itself of the clause it separated. The mark used today descended from a diagonal slash known as a virgula suspensiva. Maybe I should throw that into the translate, and it will spell it out for me.
Virgula suspensiva.
That's what I meant to say. Used in the 13th and 17th centuries to represent a pause. The modern comma was first used by Aldus Manutius. Okay, so there we go. And so it says he also made the semicolon. So let's have a look at that. So the semicolon is actually a question mark in Greek. And so I'll just type in Aldus. Okay, so he's just mentioned in the footnotes here. He mightn't be mentioned anywhere else. Semicolon. Oh yeah, so I wrote Aldus, but it says sometimes they spelled his name Aldo Manuzio. Well, you'd think they would just have it, Aldus Manutius, but anyway. So yeah, and we got the Aldine Press here in 1496. So 1496, the semicolon is attested in Petrio Bembo's book De Etna, printed by Aldus Manutius. The pronunciation also appears in the later writings of Bembo. Moreover, it was used in the 1507 book of Bartolomeo Sanvito, who was close to Manutius's circle. And so, yeah, so he's used the semicolon. Now, I was reading a book about the semicolon. I had a subscription to Everhard, which is the new Scribd. And I mean, it was okay. It was a little bit dry. And so I can't remember that much of it, but they had like 8 hours of just talking about the semicolon. So, but it is good to know these things and what a semicolon is. It's basically sort of halfway between a comma and a full stop. And but that's debated. So it's debated of how useful it is. And so anyway, but that's what was used. So that was a question mark in Greek. So if you're ever reading along in Greek and you see this, it is a question mark. Okay, so maybe although terminal marks, question marks, hang on. In Greek and the Church Slavonic, the question mark looks exactly the way a semicolon looks in English, similar to the question mark used in Latin. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that it was in Latin like that. Okay, yes. So here we see in the Church Slavonic, we see at the end of this, where is the one who is to be born King of the Jews? So it has that as a question mark. and also here. What is an interpunct? It has the question mark here, which is the shape of a semicolon. So it's good to know these type of things. So let's shut those two down and continue.
So who was Aldous? His intellectual formation, as well as political events and developments in technology, are key to understanding his ambitions. He was born in a tiny place called Bassiano, a village about 50 miles south of Rome. He was probably...
Okay, so I don't mean to stop and start it, but I do want to check out where these places are. So Bassiano. Google Maps. I mean, we've got the technology right on our fingertips to just sort of go, okay, that's exactly where he's from. So here it is. Okay, zoom out. That doesn't look like the right place because he said it was south of Rome. Where, yeah, I'll quickly go back and get the exact spelling.
Probably called Bassiano, a village about 50 miles south of...
Bassiano. Oh, okay. Bassiano. There we go. Bassiano. Keeps self-correcting. Here we go. Okay, yes, so it is just south of Rome, near Latina. And so, yeah, you basically you had the the Renaissance was in Florence. So there was a, this is pretty much where the Renaissance started and continued. There's some interesting history that we're going to look at with the Medicis and all the rest of it. So he's just around the corner from Rome. So he's most likely got access to a lot of the libraries in Rome, quite possibly the Vatican Library. And he ends up in Venice up here. Okay. Now, here in Bologna, that's where Erasmus went. He stayed there for a while. Then he moved to Venice, and he stayed with Aldous for 9 months there. So TurretinFan saying sound off. So we know that you're playing catch-up, Turretin. You can't hide that from us because we sorted that problem out. And I purposely did it to weed out the weaklings who aren't going to watch us live. No, I'm only joking. Yeah, so I guess every little town here has its own little story. Naples, but yeah, we're dealing with Aldous. So here is his hometown. Let's just zoom in there. Tiny little thing, but it looks quite amazing. Like right on the hillside there. Let's grab some pictures of this place. I mean, these look like modern buildings, but yeah, it's just quite an amazing looking place. Well, that doesn't look quite modern, does it? It looks like that could be around his era. Wow, look at that. Amazing history. Okay. Now that looked pretty old. Very beautiful place. Okay.
Rome. He was probably born about 1450. No one knows for certain, although his son said that he was born in 1452. I'd like to think he was right because that's the same year as Leonardo da Vinci, making it a good year for Renaissance geniuses and technological innovators. His first name was Theo.
So you got to think in 1450 that's a year before Constantinople fell. And so understanding that Constantinople was like Rome for the Byzantine chapter or Byzantine section. And basically the Greek-speaking church, Constantinople was their headquarters. And the Muslims came in and basically took it over that year. They bombarded it with huge cannons for months and months, to the point where they were able to breach through the wall and just come in and take the place over. Now, it was a whole city, so it took a while to take it over. But that's why you have Turkey, modern-day Turkey today, with the capital of Istanbul. That's not called Constantinople, it's called Istanbul. And the Hagia Sophia, which used to be the big church there, has been taken over and turned into a mosque. And so that's what's happened the year after Aldous Manutius is born. So what happened to all those Greek scholars who were in Constantinople? They fled to places like Italy. They were waiting on Venice to save them. So Venice was an ally. So what do? Well, you go to where your allies are. So a lot of scholars went to Venice. Thousands. They were estimated at the time of Erasmus's arrival in Venice. There was estimated to be about 5,000 Greek-speaking people in Venice, like refugees, and so people who were fluently speaking Greek. So that's, you're looking at 50, 60 years later, probably 50 years later.
Baldo, which was shortened to Aldo, but we're not sure what his actual surname was, possibly Mandutio or Manucci. But Aldo had a relaxed attitude towards how he spelled it, and he would eventually Latinize himself like many intellectuals of the day and invent himself as Aldus Manutius. In 1467, when he was about 15 or 16, he went to Rome to study at La Sapienza, a university founded in 1303. And he was very lucky with who his professor was, a guy from Verona in the north of Italy called Gaspare da Verona. Gaspare was probably in his 60s at that time.
Okay, so we don't want to just skip over this. So I want to...
Was a guy from Verona in the north of Italy called Gaspare.
Okay, let's look up Gaspare. Gaspare da Verona. Okay, he doesn't seem to have his own wiki article. Maybe I spelled it wrong. Maybe, oh, actually, I put Wikipedia. Got it. That's not him. Maybe that's another guy called Gaspare. Yeah, this looks like it could be him. Italian humanist. Ferrara. Okay, no, probably the wrong guy. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's a wiki article on it, on him, but we can go here. Not much but text. Wiki data. Okay, maybe it's there. All right, well, that's fine. There's not much. Looks like he was just a monk, but some of these monks are really interesting, like Lorenzo Valla. He's an interesting guy to look at, think about, and he was a great influence on Erasmus as well. Okay, looks like he wrote a few books. No, that was written in 1904, so I am just rabbit trailing down the wrong rabbit trail.
Verona. Gaspare was probably in his 60s at that time, and he had an illustrious lifetime of studies behind him. He'd been in Florence during the 1430s, during the golden age of the intellectual Renaissance, when he got to know and studied with many of the brightest lights in the intellectual firmament. Those of you who've watched at least a few of these videos know who they are, the big hitters of the Renaissance, scholars, manuscript hunters, and teachers, the smartest guys on the planet, brainiacs who were recovering and restoring ancient knowledge, the knowledge of the Greeks and Romans especially, and translating it, for example, from Greek or Hebrew into Latin. They were the driving forces in what was nothing short of an intellectual revolution. Gaspare learned Greek in Florence and then went to Rome in the 1440s and set up a private school where he taught Greek and Latin to young students, one of whom was a Spanish kid named Rodrigo Borja, later much better known as Rodrigo Borgia.
Okay. Rodrigo. I'm pretty sure Sergio Borga was his son. Yeah, he's got an interesting... Yeah, there was a thing called the Borgas, and it was like a series. And I started to watch it, but it was like, no, this is way too... It had raunchy scenes in it and stuff. I was just like, forget it. But it was a bit annoying because I do like watching historical reenactments. Like, say the one, there was one about Mehmed who bombed Constantinople. That was a really good series to watch. And it went, they actually had 2 seasons. They had another one about Dracula, where they get the word Dracula from. And yeah, really interesting stuff. But yeah, this Borga one, I went to watch it and it was like, why do this? This is ridiculous. You know, some of the scenes and it's just like, forget it. I'll just read about these guys. Because sometimes too, it's like you get to go into the royal family of, you know, you might be looking at stuff about Queen Elizabeth or King James or Charles. You're looking at this type of era, and they just think that they have to make it so raunchy and spicy and all the rest of it. You can't even watch it. And half the time they're missing out on actual good plot because they're just making up these side stories of all these, you know, lovers and gay, you know, raunchy things. And it's like, come on, just get with the story, you know. But I guess that's why you watch a documentary, you know. So, but I'm pretty sure Sergio Borga is the one, you know, oftentimes you'll see a picture of skinny Jesus with the long hair and he's sort of going like this. That's his son, because Rodrigo wanted to be God, the Father. And so he said, my son is Sergio. He is the Son of God. He is Jesus. So this picture, this sort of Catholic picture of Jesus has gone everywhere. And it's actually Sergio Borga, which is quite an interesting thing. He might even speak about this, but that could be a meme as well. Yeah, I think I've just sort of seen that around, floating around Facebook. Like, here's a picture of Sergio Borga. Catholics don't realize that they're actually... This was a real guy called Sergio Borga, and his father said that he was God and all this stuff. And so, anyway, so let's continue.
And even better known as Pope Alexander VI, as the father of Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia. Gaspare.
Yeah, so he calls him Cesare instead of Sergei. So now I found our friend. So the one who was tutoring Aldous, so Garino Veronossi, 1374 to 1460, Italian classical scholar, humanist, and translator of ancient Greek texts during the Renaissance. So a lot of these guys were pioneering this type of material. And we're going to be looking at a lot of these guys as well. So I thought I may as well bring this type of thing up. So he later studied Greek language and literature in Constantinople. And so, yeah, a lot of these guys were traveling to Constantinople, learning Greek from the Greeks, learning the classics, and bringing that information back to Venice, back to Florence, back to Rome. And, yeah, many times, like it says here, when he set out to return home, he had with him 2 cases of precious manuscripts of ancient Greek texts, so which he had taken great pains to collect. So he might have paid a fortune for these type of Greek texts. What were they? You know, are these biblical manuscripts, biblical documents? We're not sure. Maybe someone is sure out there, but we want to get a bigger picture of what's, you know, how, because there wasn't a Great Wall of China between the Byzantine Empire and the Roman Catholic Latin-speaking empire. They were right next to each other. So many times these people were learning each other's material. They were corresponding with each other. And so this is an influence on Aldus Manutius. So that's very interesting.
He wrote a grammar book and eventually got a job teaching at La Sapienza. And it was here, one day in 1467, that this skinny teenager from Bassiano turned up hoping to be taught. Roman.
Okay, so I don't want to leave out the Borgias because I did mention them. So when you type in Rodrigo Borgia, it comes up Pope Alexander VI. So what is that all about? Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo de Borgia. So I guess you spell it different ways. So he died in 1503. Was the head of the Catholic Church and ruler of the Papal States. And so maybe I can type in Aldus. Sometimes Aldo. No, Al. Menu. Okay, not really. But anyway, we'll just have a quick look at who he is. Obviously, he's become a pope. So Alexander was one of the most controversial of the Renaissance popes, partly because he acknowledged fathering several children by his mistresses. As a result, his Italianized Valencian surname Borgia became a byword for libertinism and despotism, which are traditionally considered as categorizing his pontificate. So he was seen as, pretty off the wall by a lot of people. So they started using his surname as a bit of you're a Borgio, if someone got a bit loose. His early life overview. So the thing is, a lot of these guys who were popes, who were bishops, many of them were highly educated, way over-educated. They knew many different languages, but that doesn't mean that they're holy or whatever. Many of these people were like this guy. It looks like this guy here was completely off the wall. And a lot of the thing is too, what happened in this period of time, and I'll sort of go through some videos explaining this, that the Medicis, they came from Florence, and they were basically the international bankers, and they bought their way into the papacy. So a lot of these people, they became bishops. They realized that there was power in the church, and so they became bishops. They became popes. And I guess it's like having someone like Rupert Murdoch or Warren Buffett becoming like a pope or something like that. It's strange, it's weird to us, but this was normal life in Italy in those days. I mean, even someone like this, you could read through his whole thing and be completely fascinated. I was hoping that I could just find some things about his intellectual significance to Aldous, but it looks like it's a whole. He's got quite a lot written about him, and I think because he was quite a controversial guy. So let's just continue on. But actually, no, I was talking about his son, Sergio. I was calling him Sergio. Sergey, sorry. So maybe there is an article about him. So okay, maybe son, buried nationalities, children here. I'll just Google this because it'll probably come up with that meme. Sergei Borgia. So there he is as Jesus. But there is a very famous picture of him. Sergei Borgia, Jesus. Yeah. Okay, so this is just on X. So, but yeah, apparently he had this type of hair. It's like this is what Jesus looked like. So it says this is not Jesus. The man here is Cesare Borgia. He was born in 1475. A very notorious Italian politician that killed his brother. And so, yeah, this is the picture that I've always seen with the picture of Sergei. What do they call him? Cesare. I'm not really good with Italian names, so please forgive me there. Anyway, that's a bit of a side issue, but I just thought I'd mention that. Now, let's just have a look at Wikipedia here. Okay. So it didn't live that long, from 75 to 1507. Yeah. Anyway, that's a side issue.
In 1467 was the perfect place for young Aldo. Not only were there teachers like Gaspare, but there were men in town such as a wealthy cardinal named Basilius Bessarion, who was Greek.
Now, Bessarion I do know of. Bessarion, because when you go through some of the manuscripts, you'll realize that it was formerly owned by Bessarion. So he had a lot of influence on the Greek scholarship of that era. So he was a bit like a Lorenzo Valla type of character. So it says here Bessarion, who was born in 1403 to 1472, was a Byzantine Greek, Renaissance humanist theologian, Catholic cardinal, and one of the famed Greek scholars who contributed to the so-called Great Revival of Letters in the 15th century. So he is a big hitter when it comes to the Greek language, probably influenced the whole Complutensian Polyglot edition, probably influenced most of the influences of that era to learn Greek. Erasmus, obviously Aldous. And so Bessarion was educated in Constantinople. So there you go. He's educated there. So he knows Greek very well. He went through liberal arts curriculum, emphasized on mathematics. So when they're basically going through and learning all about Greek. So they're learning mathematics, astronomy, geography, Pythagoras, Plato, all that other stuff. And so they're just becoming completely saturated with Greek history, Greek culture, and Greek language, Greek linguistics. And so this is, this is helping them to see the deficiencies that of the latter Latin Vulgate. Pope Eugene IV invested him with the rank of cardinal in 1439. Well, in 1439, so this is where it gets very interesting, because that's the actual date that Erasmus said that Codex Vaticanus could have been a back translation from a Latin document that was at the Council of Florence. Okay, so I'm pretty sure it was 1439. Maybe I'll just quickly type that in. Council, was it? Yeah, Council of Florence. And so you'd have these big hitters there. So he's become a cardinal there. So yeah, Plato, Greek mythology. Okay, so it's got a list on Wikipedia of Greek scholars in the Renaissance. Now that would be very interesting to go through. I wonder if I just got a list. Yeah, here we go. Wow, look at all these scholars, Greek scholars in the Renaissance. Librarian at the Vatican Library. So obviously some of these are way after the initial Reformation, but some of them way before. So very interesting. And it's very interesting too to look at some of these people. Like here you have this, like, just a random guy, I don't know anything about him, Henry Aristippus. Now he's a Greek scholar in Rome. So you've got people very early learning Greek, understanding these languages. And so like Nicholas Callicus, oh no, that's the wrong guy. But there is another Callicus who had the Communianium in his writings, Latin-speaking Italian who knew Greek fluently and wrote a whole bunch of books. And so, okay. So that seems to just be, scholars. Then it looks like painting and music. See also. So there's quite a lot the whole thing about, this is the Byzantine school. Once you open a can of worms like that, it's almost like going, let's look at German scholarship and just leaving it open like that. I mean, there's so many scholars who came from Germany or France or England. It's like saying, let's look at English poets. It's like, well, where do you start? Where do you stop? So I've left it open-ended so we can sort of go anywhere. I mean, list of Byzantine scholars. I mean, there's just so many. Before the 9th century, etc. So we sort of, that's why I'm hitting on some of these other guys and mentioning them, so that we don't, we realize that there was a huge movement. And Cardinal Bessarion, like if I go Bessarion and type in Bible manuscript, say for example, I'll just do that. Oops, here we go. Bessarion. Bible manuscript. Yeah, even like Vaticanus, it comes up. The manuscript found in the Greek monastery of Crypta Ferreta. Here we go, manuscripts. The collection in the Marciana Library contains 4,639 manuscripts and 13,117 manuscript volumes. Its historical nucleus is the private collection of Cardinal Bessarion. So you think about that. Like, I mean, this guy was a giant when it comes to Greek and understanding these. Okay, so Bessarion here. So I'm sort of looking for, sometimes you'll just find a list of Bible manuscripts, and they are attributed to Bessarion owning them and having them in his libraries. And so, anyway, I think you get the point, what I'm trying to say. So he will be another person that we're going to look at, but obviously not tonight. Let's continue.
Who was a brilliant scholar, an expert on Plato, and who owned the finest collection of Greek manuscripts anywhere in Western Europe, almost 500 of them, along with hundreds more in Latin. Bessarion was a great advocate for learning. In 1467, he wrote, "There is no more worthy or honorable possession, no more dignified and valuable treasure than a book. They live, they converse, and speak with us. They teach us, educate us, console us. Books bring the past to life and place it before our eyes." It's safe to say that Aldo would take a very similar view of the role and importance of books, and he would devote his life to them. Now, and this is crucial to the story, Bessarion worried about how fragile manuscripts were, and therefore how easily precious knowledge could be lost. He'd seen this in action, unfortunately, some 15 years earlier with the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks under Mehmed the Conqueror in 1453. Mehmed was a very...
Okay, so Mehmed, I'm just going to show you the series that I watched. Mehmed. Mehmed. Okay. Mehmed, and we're looking at series Rise of Empires. Okay, so that's what it's called. I'll show you what that is. I think it was on like Netflix or something like that. Yeah, it's on Netflix. So Rise of Empires, it's well done. And yeah, it's basically just shows how it was believed that, because they have prophets as well, who was saying, you're going to be the savior of Islam and all this sort of stuff. And so when he took over Constantinople, it was quite a huge thing, and they saw this as like the revival of their empire. And so, they basically took it over for 400 years. And what was interesting is they took over Israel as well, and basically were there for 400 years until 1917. And so it was actually the Australian light horsemen who led the charge against the Ottoman Turks, and came and pushed them out of that area. And so without that happening, there wouldn't have been like a modern day state of Israel unless another war occurred. But that's quite interesting. So I would recommend, if you want to get a bit of a historical feel about it, Rise of Empires, look up Ottoman. I'm pretty sure that's the one. So anyway,
very educated man who valued knowledge and who didn't want Constantinople pillaged after the conquest. But nonetheless, lots of ancient manuscripts were lost in 1453. One report claimed that 120,000 were destroyed. That's certainly an exaggeration, but war is always bad for books, art, and knowledge in general. Cardinal Bessarion grieved these losses and called the sack of Constantinople the fall of Greece. He had therefore been trying ever since to put together all of the wisdom of the ancient world, especially that of Greece, before it could be lost, to somehow preserve it for the future. Then, in 1469, in an incredibly generous gesture, Bessarion donated all of his manuscripts to the city of, guess where, Venice. And some 20 years later, Aldo, as if magnetized, would follow these manuscripts to the city. Now,
Wow, so I didn't know that. So Bessarion, he's donated all these manuscripts, and then Aldous has come along and started printing those manuscripts. So that's an amazing link. And I guess it shows you too that because Bessarion he had quite a lot to do with biblical manuscripts, so that would have influenced Aldous, but also been a direct influence on Erasmus as well. Because if Erasmus is in Venice living with Aldous for 9 months, do you think he's going to go to the libraries and check out these? Do you think he's going to go and check out the collection of Bessarion? Of course he is. And so all you have to do, like the whole, Dan Wallace saying that Erasmus had access to 5 manuscripts, when you look at James White, he says, well, 6 manuscripts, but if you press him, 12, but if you really press him, 20, and other, there's all these numbers that crop up. They're contradictory, but all you have to do is go, okay, Erasmus would have gone and saw this collection of Greek manuscripts that Bessarion had. All you have to do is look at how many biblical manuscripts Bessarion had access to, and you would think that Erasmus would have had access to those as well. So that's quite an interesting thing, quite an interesting link.
Something else
to I guess it's an interesting link to different people, but it's also an interesting link to a geographic location in Venice, because Erasmus was 3 years in Italy all up, and he was there specifically to learn the Greek language and to further his qualifications. And he already knew Greek, but he wanted to polish it. He wanted to learn Greek from the Greeks, and that's exactly what he did.
Galvanized Aldo at this time. Rome was the perfect city for a bright and ambitious young man in 1467, someone who was interested in books, because by a wonderful coincidence, an exciting new invention had just arrived in the city. An invention that in 1467 could be found nowhere else in Italy and in only a few places north of the Alps. An invention whose mysterious workings were, until recently, a well-guarded secret. And that is, of course, the printing press. It had been invented and perfected by Johannes Berg in Germany in the mid-1450s, so a bit more than a decade earlier. But at some point in the early 1460s, 2 Germans crossed the Alps into Italy and made their way south to the Benedictine monastery of Subiaco, some 40 miles east of Rome, bringing with them the secret of printing technology. Their names were Konrad Schweinheim and Arnold Panards. They came from Mainz, Gutenberg's town. They were associates of Gutenberg, and it's possible that one or both actually worked on the famous 42-line Gutenberg Bible. In any case, they were expert printers with the know-how to produce their own printed volumes. And very soon after their arrival, they set up their press in Subiaco and in 1463 began printing books. A year or so later, that is just a year or so before Aldo arrived in Rome in 1467, they moved from Subiaco to Rome. And 2 of their biggest fans were Gaspare da Verona and Cardinal Bessarion, as well as, I think we can safely guess, young Aldo. And young Aldo, in the fullness of time, would become the greatest of all the Italian printers. But first of all, after he completed his studies in Rome and then went on for further grad studies, as we might call them, in Ferrara, Aldo worked as a teacher. By 1480, he was in Carpi in northern Italy, where he worked as the tutor to two young princes from the Pio family. One of them, Alberto, would later become a great scholar in his own right. But at this time, he was only 5 years old, and so Aldo was basically his kindergarten teacher. Aldo almost certainly got this job thanks to his friendship with someone he met at school in Ferrara, the boy's maternal uncle, a young chap named Giovanni Pico, the Prince of Mirandola, a man we've met before in these videos, the guy who could recite Dante's Divine Comedy by heart, all 14,233 lines of it, forwards and then backwards.
Wow.
Pico wanted to turn Mirandola into an intellectual center, and he seems to have invited Aldo to spend some time.
You see how sometimes you're going through this material, you have to actually learn for quite a while just to understand how learned these people are. And that was one of the things with Lancelot Andrewes, like to just think of someone knowing 21 languages, 15 modern languages and 6 ancient languages, and then all the things that he wrote in and talked about. You have to be learned to understand how learned he is. So it's a lot of people just, this sort of stuff goes over their head, but like to be able to quote Dante verbatim and then backwards, like
there in the 1480s. And so Aldo, besides teaching his young princes, moved in the upper echelons of intellectual society. He was friends not only with Pico, but also with people like Angelo Poliziano and Marsilio Ficino, the new generation of scholars and linguists who were fascinated by ancient manuscripts and by Greek literature and philosophy in particular. But then in about 1490, Aldo upped stakes in Carpi and moved to Venice. It's natural for us to assume that he went there because he wanted to work as a printer. That might well be the case, but we don't actually know for sure that's why he originally went there. He might simply have gone in the first place in order to find more students or to found a school, because the little Pio brothers had finished their studies with him. Everyone thinks about Aldo as a printer rather than a teacher, but for him, the two things went together. He was a very dedicated teacher with big ideas about education. He wrote a letter to Caterina Pio, the boy's mother, describing the necessity of students learning Greek and studying ancient philosophy, the works of Plato and Aristotle, for example, and he also wrote very movingly to her about his dedication to her boys. In any case, Aldo, or Aldus as he was now calling himself, absolutely loved Venice. He found himself in what he called a place more like a whole world than a city. He found a vibrant cosmopolitan center that was an intellectual hub with Venetian scholars like the great Pietro Bembo, here we see him painted by Raphael, mixing with Greek emigres from the East. Venice had traditionally had very strong ties with the Byzantine Empire in the East, with Constantinople, and Venice therefore became a natural place of refuge for Greeks after 1453. There were also publishers and great libraries, including ones with Greek manuscripts, such as those of Cardinal Bessarion. However, I should point out that the Venetians did not make Bessarion's collection available to many scholars at this time. And there isn't actually any good evidence that Aldus had access to it.
That's interesting to know, because on the surface you would just think, okay, well, Erasmus went and looked at Bessarion's material and Aldus looked at it. But then again, you got someone like Erasmus who would be able to open doors because of the influence that he had. And so that would be an interesting rabbit trail to go down.
Appealing as the thought is, at least to me. But no matter, there were plenty of other books and manuscripts for him in Venice. Here we see where Aldus first set up shop in Campo Sant Agustin, marked today by a commemorative plaque. In Aldus's day, there was a bakery next door, which would have been handy for his morning baguette, but which must have caused a few anxieties because bakeries were the buildings, the businesses most likely to catch fire. Two things seem to have prompted Aldus to go into the printing business in the 1490s. In the first place, he seems to have wanted better textbooks. He wanted more accurate and more attractive books for his students and for students in general. And in 1493, he hired a Venetian printer to produce a copy of his own Latin grammar, a grammar he himself composed for the edification of his students. So there's a pedagogical aspect to his foray into publishing right here at the beginning. Secondly, and more immediately, he was worried about war. The war that broke out in 1494 when King Charles VIII of France invaded Italy in order to press his claim to the throne of Naples, thereby throwing all of Italy into terrible upheaval. This is the beginning of what one writer at the time called the Troubles of Italy, which were brought about by greedy French dynastic
Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about this war, the Italian War of 1494-1495. So we see it's all divided up in, the Kingdom of Naples, Sicily down the bottom, Sardinia here, Corsica, but Republic of Venice. And so it's quite interesting how everything is set up. So the First Italian War, or Charles VIII's Italian War, was the opening phase of the Italian Wars. The war pitted Charles VIII of France, who had initial Milanese aid, against the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and an alliance of Italian powers led by Pope Alexander VI, known as the League of Venice. And so a bit of a timeline there, which I won't go through, but I just sort of mention this war. So there's Charles VIII of France, and so the French have invaded. So that would have been quite messy. And I guess in our story, we will probably go through some of the political aspects to Italy during that time. But let's continue.
Was trying to do without understanding this dreadful political context, what Aldus himself called the tumultuous and sad times in which the use of weapons is more common than that of books. The French invasion of 1494 was to Aldus what Constantinople and 1453 had been to Cardinal Bessarion, a terrible threat to intellectual culture and heritage. Aldus was quite naturally worried that warfare would destroy the libraries of Italy and that much precious knowledge would be lost. And of course, that had been happening for centuries, if not millennia. It was probably no coincidence then that Aldus's first printed book appeared in late February 1495, soon after the French invasion. It was a Greek grammar, a book by Constantine Lascaris. It's a dual language edition.
Wow. So this looks amazing. So it looks like you got the Alpha Vita. So where we get our word, modern day word, alphabet, or the Aleph Beth in Hebrew, the Alpha Vita, or the alphabet in English. So very interesting here. And then translated into Latin. So here we have the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, Zeta, Eta, Theta, Iota, Kappa, Lambda, going through and explaining all this in Latin. So it's very interesting.
In both Latin and Greek. And it contains a kind of manifesto in which we can read Aldous' fears for classical learning at the hands of marauding soldiers. Because in the work, he laments the huge wars that devastate all of Italy and soon seem to overwhelm the whole world from its very foundations. So he's dedicating himself, he writes, to the advantage of humanity. And he says that he's going to sacrifice a quiet and peaceful existence for one full of worries and hardships, which for the most part are going to be economic, because then, as now, sadly, you don't get rich through writing and publishing quality books on philosophy and other intellectual topics.
So it seems like this guy knows this firsthand. Look at his bookshelf. I mean, you know, it's all art and, you know, the school of the new Europe. Here he's got Machiavelli, Giotto, Leonardo da Vinci. So he's looking at art. He's looking at Van Gogh in the background. So it looks like he's very interested in art. But I'm pretty sure he's written a couple of books. And, yeah, you don't get rich from that.
And in fact, Aldous seems to have been so short of cash at various points that you didn't ever want to get an invitation to his dinner table, because he would serve you soup made from moldy cheese and snails that he collected from the public latrines.
So you hear this sort of thing, it's like he's collected snails from the public latrines. It just makes you go, well, okay, that's got to be footnoted. You know, where is this information coming from? I remember there was this one guy, and I won't mention his name. And you know, he lived with me for like a year and a half. Okay, very smart guy. You know, he was part of the IMF. So talking about economics with him was really great. It was intellectually stimulating to have a chat with him. But he was talking about, you know, he was actually like considered himself like a, you know, born again Christian, but he would make the distinction that I was a protty. I was a proddy. I was a, you know, a prot. And he was sort of like grew up a bit of a Greek Orthodox sort of thing, was actually Macedonian. And so it was interesting talking to him about Alexander the Great, because he was actually Macedonian, you know. And so, but he mentioned that Martin Luther, there was this thing where Martin Luther ate his own feces. And he said, you guys follow a guy who ate his own feces, mate. You guys have problems. And I was just like, you know, there's so much in just that. It's just gaslighting. Where did you get this information? Obviously, the Roman Catholics hated Luther, so they would have made up anything about him. Even some Protestant groups didn't like Luther, you know. So they're like, and, you know, who knows in what context it was written. Like, I actually haven't looked it up or anything like that. But then he's like, you're following this guy. And it's like, well, I'm not like a Lutheran. I'm not a Lutherite. You know, it's just like being called a Ruckmanite. You're just like, you're following this person, you know. And it's like, oh, okay. And he's like, you prots. Like I'm just a prot. And there was just so much to it. And anyway, so this sort of reminds me of that. And yeah, he was telling me, oh, you Anglos, just everyone who's Anglo-Saxon have problems with like all your priests and stuff molesting kids. Us who, you know, grew up in like the Greek Orthodox, Macedonian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, we don't have those sort of problems. What's wrong with you guys? And it's just like, like looking back, it is just the worst. Like I would just be absolutely gaslit. Like, hang on. And it would take me a while to sort of even process how many things that he said wrong, you know. It's like, why am I all of a sudden related to every other Anglo-Saxon? Why am I part of some sort of church scandals, and then it's like probably in the Orthodox Church they just cover it up, just like the Catholics do, but the Catholics don't do a good job of covering it up. But anyway, so I just sort of mentioned this whole thing of they ate snails from the latrine and all this, and it's like, well, I'm just not sure about that. That would have to be footnoted.
Aldous needed to find startup capital for his press, and he seems to have turned to his former student, Alberto Pio, who may have helped him out, because Aldous dedicated his first book to him. But he entered into a financial partnership with two guys. One was a printer named Andrea Torresano, who had more than 20 years of expertise, so someone whose experience Aldous could draw on. And he's the one who published Aldous' Latin grammar. And the relations became even more intimate when Aldous married his daughter. The other was a wealthy Venetian aristocrat named Pier Francesco Barbarigo, whose father and uncle had both served as doges in Venice. In fact, his uncle, Agostino Barbarigo, was doge throughout the 1490s. And this shows that Aldous, even in these early days, was moving in pretty lofty circles. Aldous owned about 10% of the company, but he was the driving force behind it, the one who apparently made decisions about what to publish. And so it was presumably Aldous who, in 1494 or 1495, came up with the ambitious plan of printing in Greek the complete works of Aristotle. Aristotle was the uncontested authority on a whole range of subjects. But before Aldous, it was very difficult to read him in the original Greek. Aristotle's works could be read in good Latin translations, including printed ones, but manuscripts are much harder to come by, and no one had ever attempted to print all of Aristotle's works in the original Greek. But by June of 1498, after about 3 years of work, Aldous and his team, because he had about 14 employees at the press, as well as a group of scholars and experts who consulted with him, had produced 5 volumes of Aristotle's works, and they thereby made his work widely available to scholars in its original language. Just a quick word about the Greek type. Aldous was not the first to print in Greek letters. A printer in Milan had produced a Greek grammar in 1476, an edition of Constantine Lascaris, and an edition of Homer was printed in Florence in 1488, a magnificent accomplishment. It was obviously tricky to get the lettering right. The job was much more complicated than just doing the 24 uppercase and 24 lowercase letters of the Greek alphabet. You had to know which ligatures and diacritical marks, such as accents, could be included, as well as things such as breathing marks. The little squiggles that look like apostrophes that integrate.
Sorry about that. Looks like my internet is getting a little bit cut off. So just hold on a sec. I will just work this out. Okay, so hopefully that will run a little bit better. If not, I will go back to the original of what was happening. So I will rewind that a tiny bit. So we're just talking about the Greek alphabet here. So he's made a very good point with the Greek alphabet. So we've usually got the 24 letters here. So then you've got the uppercase and the lowercase. And it's interesting that that comes from printer terminology. The uppercase letters were the bigger letters, and the lowercase letters were the smaller letters. That they got those metal letters from the uppercase or from the lowercase. So yeah, usually you've got the 24. There was a few little letters here and there. But then you have the diacritics. So I'll make this page a little bit larger so we can examine all these. Like, check out these diacritics here. So, I mean, just for the alpha, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there was estimated that you needed 1,000 different letters to do a print of a Greek document. So I'll just show you down this page. I often go to this page because this is just Wikipedia, but they do have quite a lot of letters in the bottom part of it. So here we see, like, this is Garamond, and so he's printing here, and even just to look at this and how many different types of characters you need, and then you got something like this, which is a ligature. So ligature is, it's almost like a shorthand, like say the UF2 here, okay, the alpha, upsilon, the tau, but then it looks like sort of like a U with an O on the bottom, and it is actually a upsilon and an omicron. So it actually has, it would sound like auto, but it's actually afto in the modern Greek pronunciation. But you can see there's just this floating letter here. You got this thing down the bottom that sort of looks like a clamp. And look, it appears there. It appears here. You can tell that's actually like identical. It's very interesting. But to come up with all these letters, I mean, that's huge. The cosmon, the world here. There's a lot in that just to make this. Like you can tell this Omicron looking letter is actually a P, which is very interesting. And then you got the capital letters. So let's just go back to the alphabet page. So this is, how it would have appeared in an uncial and in a minuscule. But then I'll just go down to this section here. So here's some, it does have Coptic. Now, basically, Coptic is the Greek. It's basically the Egyptian language with Greek characters. So I guess, sometimes we might have things written out phonetically in English so we can say it, but they're saying it with the Greek lettering, but they're saying Egyptian words, sort of thing. So there's a bit of a mix here, but when you look at the one below it, this is showing the extended Greek. So look at this. You got 7 different alphas in the lowercase, and then you've got just as many in the uppercase, all with the hard breathing, the smooth breathing, the diacritic, the accents, things like that. And then you've also got all the same with the iota subscript underneath, which usually puts something in a dative form. But so you go through this. There's so many different letters, and this was the problem, and this is why Greek wasn't printed immediately. And anyone who did printing of Greek, usually it took them a long time because you've got all of these letters, and so you think you've got to make this letter here, and that's a huge feat to do that, and to mold that and turn it into a piece of metal that you can read backwards in a mirror. The whole printing process is just incredible. But anyway, so that's what's being discussed here.
Critical marks such as accents could be included, as well as things such as breathing marks, the little squiggles that look like apostrophes that indicate the presence or absence of an H sound. As an indication of how complex it was, a later printer in Greek working in Italy found that he needed 776 different pieces of type. Aldous was accomplished in Greek, but of course he needed help, and Greek scholars who had fled Constantinople and the East were obviously vital to his enterprises. And Aldous based his type on the handwriting of a friend of his, a scholar from Crete named Marcus Mazuras, who was professor of Greek in Padua. The type for it was cut by the engraver Francesco Grifo, who designed both Greek and Latin characters for Aldous, including an elegant Roman type, later known as Bembo, because it was first used in a book that Aldo printed by the great scholar and poet Pietro Bembo. It's one of the most beautiful and influential typefaces ever made, the ancestor of fonts such as Garamond, for example. Grifo was a brilliant designer, one of the greatest who had ever lived, but he was also a difficult character. He fell out with Aldous, although Aldous could also be difficult, to be fair, and then even more seriously, he eventually fell out with his son-in-law, whom he beat to death with an iron bar in the house they shared in Bologna.
Whoops. That's not a good look. You're working with Aldous, and then you go and live with your son and you beat him to death with an iron bar in Bologna. History is amazing.
Grifo's exact end is not known for certain, but he was presumably executed for the crime. A very sad end to someone who'd been such a wonderful engraver and goldsmith.
Mm.
One of the things that Aldous gave us was punctuation. The semicolon, the apostrophe, and the comma. The comma and semicolon were intended to help us as readers, to let us know the rhythm of a sentence, when and how long to pause. I realize that semicolon and apostrophe are both now on the endangered species list and the subject of much abuse, but they do serve a purpose, setting off parts of grammar from other parts, making the meaning clear. And this is what Aldous wanted to do. He wanted to make the reading experience easier, to make reading less of a puzzle. Aldous went on to print lots of other works in Greek, including the complete works of Plato, which he finished in 1513. He was saving the...
So Erasmus would have read all of these works.
Intellectual treasures of ancient Greece for the modern world of the 1500s, and so too, ultimately, for us. Now, we won't go on about Plato here, but those of you who have watched my enthralling video on him will know just how important his recovery was to Western culture. He was recovered by the Florentines in the 1400s, given by them to the world in Latin, and now, in 1513, Aldous gave him to the world in Greek. This is the Hypnerotomachia Polyphily, published...
That was the word I was trying to say before, or the two words.
...by Aldous in 1499. Still, more than 500 years after publication, one of the strangest, most mysterious, and most beautiful books ever produced. It's also one of the most valuable. And that's a nice irony, because the book itself was a flop when it came out. Almost no one bought it. It's a mysterious book because no one actually knows who wrote it. A Dominican friar named Francesco Colonna seems the likeliest candidate, although it has to be said it's a very unlikely and counterintuitive project for a Dominican friar. And likewise, no one knows who did the remarkable illustrations, a total of 172 wood engravings, which are masterpieces of line and design. And it's a very strange book because it tells a very strange story. The title translates as The Strife of Love in the Dream of Polyphilo. Polyphilo, in a dream within a dream, searches for his beloved, a nymph named Polia. And
in a dream within a dream, it sounds like the concept of Inception. And I think that's why a lot of people enjoyed that Inception movie, was because it did have a lot of those intellectual overtones, a dream within a dream.
And along the way, he goes through a kind of labyrinth of ancient architectural ruins, statues, Latin and Greek inscriptions, hieroglyphics, and all sorts of mythological and allegorical figures. The book is written in an invented language, a mishmash of Italian, Latin, and Greek, as if it were done by sort of 15th century James Joyce. One scholar has called it learned macaroni.
Okay, so I'm not sure who James Joyce is. James Joyce. James Joyce died in 1941, was an Irish novelist, poet, and literary critic. Okay, interesting. I've heard also, I haven't read it, and I actually haven't watched the movie even before I've become a Christian or anything. Clockwork Orange was sort of written like that. It was written in like a type of, like someone was saying that when you watch the movie, they miss out on the whole thing of when you read the book. It has all this rhyming sort of Cockney type of language to it that you actually learn as you read the book, which makes the book so much more interesting, apparently. So I guess, having, this its own language, mysterious type of, Greek, Latin, Italian sort of mix, you read that, and I guess it's just a clever thing to go through.
And claimed that only the most pugnacious of readers can force their way through it. That may well be so. It may be tough going to read, but it's a pleasure to turn the pages because it's an absolutely amazing virtuoso feat of typography and illustration.
Aha, so that's the symbol of Aldous, the anchor, and the dolphin. So I think the dolphin is the speed, and the anchor is, I guess, what an anchor is. How else would you describe an anchor? Something that's solid. Yeah, and I guess they're doing something that's solid, but they're doing it as quick as they can, but it's timeless. Anyway, he might explain it.
One of the hieroglyphics in the Hypnerotomachia gave Aldous the symbol for his press, the famous dolphin and anchor, which represents his motto, Festina lente, make haste slowly. The dolphin represents
like make haste slowly. So it means hurry up slowly. Because I guess this type of work would have been, I guess, doing ASP or PHP coding, or, working in Microsoft Excel, doing lines with that. Yeah, that's the type of thing that I picture, doing this type of typesetting where you're sitting there with a mirror, making sure that everything's all in line. If you have a rough breathing or a smooth breathing wrong and you print that, that can destroy the whole book, So anyway.
Haste, liveliness, and activity, and the anchor is stability. And these were the two qualities that Aldous wished to combine. For Aldous's next great innovation, I want to fast forward a few years to December the 10th, 1513. In what is probably the most famous letter of the 1500s, an embittered, out-of-work Florentine politician named Niccolo Machiavelli writes to a friend in Rome. Niccolo is living just outside of Florence, in exile and in disgrace, recently sprung from prison and spared execution for plotting against the Medici. Here, living in the country, he describes his
So the Medici are a very influential family in Italy at the time, and many of them were bankers, and many of them had become high up in the Roman Catholic Church as well. So very powerful people.
typical day to his friend. The letter is famous because in it, Niccolo describes how he's just finished writing a little book on principalities, what became, of course, The Prince, one of the most notorious books in history. But I want to look at another part of the letter. Niccolo describes how he gets up in the morning and goes into the woods where he watches his woodcutters chopping down trees. And then he writes, upon leaving the woods, I go to a spring. I have a book under my arm, Dante, Petrarch, or one of the minor poets. This might not strike us as being out of the ordinary. We can easily read books outside, on the beach, on buses, on airplanes. But Machiavelli is boasting here. This is the equivalent of flourishing the latest iPhone in the face of your friend. Because being able to walk around in the woods and then sit in the nook of a tree and pass the hours with a book that you carried with you was something entirely new. And it was something that was made possible by Aldus, who in about 1500 began creating what he called libelli portatiles, or portable books. Previously, most printed books were page monsters, big folios bound in leather and board that you would have had to wrestle out the door of your house, and that besides being heavy and awkward, made for the desk or the lectern, were expensive enough that you wouldn't want to cart them into the woods for a spot of reading, even if you could. The octavo format, as this small size was called, was used previously, but almost exclusively for devotional books, for prayer books and such like, so you could carry them around with you to perform your prayers and devotions. But Aldus, who wanted to spread knowledge and make it accessible and enjoyable, who wanted to take it out of the study and into the world, who wanted you to be able to carry that wisdom in your pocket, realized that it could make the reading experience different. You didn't have to sit at your desk inside your house or study. You could take a book with you to read, like Machiavelli, in a meadow, a tree, or on your travels. Now, in order to print these small books and make them affordable, I'll come to prices in a minute, Aldus invented something else, italic print. He based his italics on the handwriting, the cursive.
So when Erasmus contacted Aldus and said, I want you to print my Adagus, which was his collection of proverbs and sayings, he said, I want you to do it in your italic font, because that had just become the best font that any printer was using. So it was his particular one. Obviously, there was no copyright in those days, so people could just steal it, but it would just take a long time for people to, it's not like just stealing, grabbing someone's font on your computer nowadays. I mean, you had to make all these. And so obviously people would start to do that. And eventually, all these lettering systems just became like universal. But Aldus did have quite a unique type of font.
Of script used by Italian scribes in the 1400s. Why did he do this? Because oblique letters take up less space than regular upright ones, making it so he could print more words on each page and thereby keep his paper and printing costs down so he could sell his portable books for less. Incidentally, we now call this style italic, which is what the French printers began calling it when they made counterfeits of it for their bootleg editions of his work, because Aldus was bootlegged. But the Italian printers originally called it Aldino as a kind of tribute to Aldus. We can think of these little books as the equivalent of paperbacks, of Penguin Classics or something like that. And like the editors of the Penguin Classics, started just after World War II on the brink of mass education, Aldous was trying to make quality books accessible for larger groups of people. Now, as far as Aldus's prices went, a single volume of his Aristotle would cost you 2 to 3 ducats. Although as part of a deal, you could get the whole 5-volume set for 11 ducats. Now, that's a fair whack. Aldous, as a school teacher, had probably earned less than 100 ducats a year, maybe as many as few as 50 or 60. And so 10 or 12 ducats for the complete Aristotle is a big outlay for a teacher or scholar. But it's still a lot cheaper than a single handwritten manuscript. A single manuscript by the greatest manuscript dealer of the 1400s, the great Vespasiano da Bisticci, could set you back 50, 60, 70 ducats. So the printing press obviously makes information more widely available by bringing new socio-economic groups into the marketplace. In any case, Aldous wanted to exert a downward pressure on prices, and his pocketbooks were aimed at a much wider audience. And in fact, he did a print run for some of these of 3,000 copies, which for those days was an absolutely huge print run. And in fact, many authors today would give their incisors for a print run of 3,000 copies.
So I remember when I was in New York and I went to the big bookshop there. I can't remember the name of it, but they had a huge quotation on the side of the wall, and I was like, wow, this is a quote of Erasmus. It was interesting. And it said, when I have a little money, I buy books. And if I have any left, I buy food and clothes. So Erasmus was sort of saying he is buying books. So he would have bought all these books of Aldous. Yeah, he knew all these books quite well. And so, and I guess in those days, we buy a book today and we sort of read through it. It sits on the shelf. And sometimes I just buy books and they just sit there and I only just use them for a reference. But in those days, those books were rare. And I guess just as rare as a manuscript is to us, books would have been rare. And people like Erasmus, he was spending all of his money, all of his savings and everything on books. And when he had a little left over, he bought food and clothes. So that's very interesting to see where his priorities were.
Now, to conclude, I wish I could say that Aldous got rich, but he didn't. However, he did get famous, so famous that every writer in Europe wanted to be published by him. The greatest scholar in Europe at the time, Desiderius Erasmus, wrote to him saying that...
Now, just listen to what he just said there.
Writer in Europe wanted to be published by him. The greatest scholar in Europe at the time...
He's a secular guy, and he's saying Erasmus is the greatest scholar in Europe at the time. So we've gone through a whole bunch of scholars, Renaissance scholars, people who became popes and cardinals and all sorts of different things, heads of state. And Erasmus exceeds them all and is called the greatest of scholars at the time. And so this is something that you just don't hear in critical text circles. These guys who are promoting the critical text, demonizing the Textus Receptus, they're usually throwing Erasmus under the bus and saying, oh, he made a mistake here. He didn't really care about the Greek here and there. He was the greatest, considered the greatest scholar of that time by secular scholars who don't have a barrow to push. They're just saying things how they are historically. This guy's just a historian. And this is the thing. A lot of people don't realize the amazing heritage that is behind the Bible that we hold in our hands today. And so we're going to take that journey. We're going to go through and look at, we're still going to look at Aldous. I want to exhaust the topic of Aldous. This hasn't finished yet, by the way. We want to look at many other people who were around Erasmus at the time. We want to look at Reuchlin. We want to look at Lorenzo Valla and a whole bunch of others. So,
Desiderius Erasmus wrote to him saying that the elegance of his volumes would make him, i.e. Erasmus, immortal if only they could work together, which they did, and they became friends, and Erasmus did become immortal. In 1514, the year before he died, Aldous wrote about how he was harassed by all the people coming into his print shop. I am hampered in my work, he wrote, by 1,000 interruptions. Nearly every hour comes a letter from some scholar, and if I undertook to reply to them all, I should be obliged to devote day and night to scribbling. And he was lucky. These were the days before email.
It's funny. A friend of mine who I work with quite a lot, he was an ASP programmer. So ASP, you got PHP and then you got ASP, which is the Microsoft sort of version. And he said he would be in the middle of doing all this code. And he said he likened it to like a chandelier of thoughts. You've got all these connecting thoughts. And when you're deep in thought and deep in study, to have a sudden abrupt interruption, he likened it to like just watching a chandelier fall from the ceiling and just shatter on the ground, because it would take you sometimes half an hour or an hour to get back to where you were, because you've built up to this certain place and you're in this zone. And he said, someone just opening the door and saying, "You want a cup of coffee?" And he said it would happen quite frequently. And it was quite comical to watch him and his missus go through this. And they were a great couple. And she would open the door, "You want a cup of coffee?" And he would just look at me and go, "It's chandelier's just broken." But so he would just have a break, have a coffee, and then get back into it. And sure enough, it'll be like an hour later, he's in the zone again. It was quite funny.
He eventually stuck a sign on his door that said, "Whoever you are earnestly requested by Aldous to state your business briefly and to take your departure promptly." So we can thank Aldous for achieving his magnificent vision of a world in which books were elegant and of high quality, yet copious, inexpensive, and available to all, for trying to place the greatest wisdom of the ages in the hands of all of us so that we could, like him, work through our own tumultuous and sad times for the benefit of humanity. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. Please watch more of these videos. And please remember the words of Cardinal Bessarion. There is no more worthy or honorable possession, no more dignified and valuable treasure than a book. And therefore, if you want to know more about Plato and printers in the 1400s and about the brainiacs recovering the exquisite knowledge of the ancients, I can't think of a better resource for you than my latest book, The Bookseller of Florence, available in your favorite bookshop.
Okay, so there we go. So, so he has quite a lot of videos. So I guess the printing press and maybe the Venetian ghetto, that will help us. I'll go through some of these and just work out exactly where to go next. But yeah, I really enjoyed that, and he's very easy to listen to. So Ross King, so he seems like he's an author. I'll give him a plug, since we're using his material. Ross King books. Let's have a look. Ross King. Here we go. RossKingBooks.com. Give him a bit of a plug. The Shortest Story of Italy, books, virtual tour, YouTube, and contact. Okay, so here are his books. Domino, Ex Libris, Brunelleschi's Dome. It's interesting. Michelangelo and the Pope's Ceiling, The Judgment of Paris, Machiavelli, Defiant Spirits. Might just look at that a little bit closer. The Modernist Revolution of the Group of Seven. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so it's 1912, so it's a bit out of time. Okay, so here's some of his other books. Judgment of Paris, Michelangelo and the Pope's Ceiling, Domino. Okay, that looks like it could be, it's a novel. Yeah, it is. Anyway, we'll go back to here. The shortest history of Italy, the bookseller of Florence. So that looks like it's to do with Aldous, Mad Enchantment, Florence, Leonardo and the Last Supper, and the Fantasia of Leonardo da Vinci. Very interesting. So the Renaissance in Florence. So the king of the world's booksellers. Okay, so that I thought that would be about Aldous, but it's not. That looks like a bookseller of Florence. So I guess very interesting. He would be an interesting guest to get on the show. Actually, he would be a good guy to interview. Mad Enchantment, Claude Monet and the painting of the water lilies. I think I watched a video of his about the water lilies, and I was like, I'm a little bit bored with this, but that's his thing. Florence, the painting and frescoes. So obviously this is the very famous, the picture of the Renaissance, the Adobe Illustrator picture. One thing the other day when I was going through the material, the Gail Ripplinger accusations, I actually looked up, if you go to any type of PDF file, maybe I'll just type in, I'll go to AV Publications. AV Publications. So this is Gail Ripplinger's material. AV Publications Online Study Guide. Okay, that's not what I'm looking for. Maybe Gail Ripplinger. Way of Life, Amazon. Here we go. It's just a classic. Like Texe Marrs. He would, if this was like someone who did an ESV or something like that, he would say that's a 6, that's a 6, and that's a 6. 6, 6, 6. There you go. It's evil, And oftentimes you see this type of thing with the triquetra. But let's have a look at the freebies, and we'll go to my one. So this is the accusations against me, Nick Sayers. So this is the latest one. Now, look at the Adobe Illustrator symbol, the PDF symbol. I'll just type that in, PDF, Adobe logo. I mean, doesn't Gail realize that every one of her PDFs has 666 on it? Like, this is the sort of thing that she says against us, or against just, humanity, that we haven't recognized that that's a 6, that's a 6, that's a 6, So this is the same type of thing as the NKJV logo 666 thing. This type of thing. So I wonder if Gail Riplinger, I'm pretty sure she does, on her New King James pamphlet, this one here. Like, how amazing is this? Like, I know, like she's saying this is this 3-headed snake, and it's a 6, and a 6 sort of thing. The counterfeit one. Okay. I'm just going to try and find this. Well, they do call it the triquetra, I think it is. So I'll just have a quick look for that. Yeah, here. Triquetra, Gail Riplinger. Maybe images. Riplinger. Okay, so Joseph Armstrong's actually done a whole thing on it. That's interesting. But let's listen to see what she says here. Okay, maybe I can find where she's talking about it.
Okay.
The first question was, what about the New King James? And I'll give you in several places, him God's servant. After 2, your move Christ is third there. Other signs, watered down interpret when they're talking, taking that out, down the Trinity. The word that, because they, and so in this Bible, if the end of the chapter 20, the judgment eon, definition, a fear, a mental.
Okay, so she's not showing the symbol there.
Interviews that I did with Southwest Radio Church that may have
That's
been
where I heard you.
What you heard.
Yes.
Okay. This
driving down the road, and I said, "Who is this lady?" Yeah.
Well, as a matter of fact, AV Publications and Ararat has available those radio interviews as well as 32 other.
Okay, so anyway, I think you get what I'm trying to say. This logo is on all of her PDFs. So this PDF about me, it has 666 in the corner, according to her. According to these type of scholars. So very interesting. Anyway, so I'll drop that down. We've finished our video here. So next time, I will go through a lot of Ross King's material, but I'll just search through some more stuff about Aldous and whether we want to just keep exhausting Aldis's material. I think you're getting a picture of Aldous Manutius, and I think it's very important that you do, because he was also the one who did the first entire Greek Bible in print, which was the Septuagint and the Textus Receptus in 1518. So he was the third one to print a Bible. He was the first one to actually print chapters from the Bible. He did 6 chapters of John in 1506. And so that would be interesting to look at what he was using, what text he was using. I mean, I guess it's unfortunate in a way that he did John, because John, like up to chapter 6, is like when you even compare that to the critical text, it's very similar. But that would be interesting looking at, say, John chapter 5 verses 3 and 4, where 42 English words, at least in the King James, are deleted from obviously the underlying critical text is changed there. All right. So apart from that, as I mentioned, we have Nehemiah Gordon has agreed to come on our program. And also we are trying to solidify a date for Jonathan Sheffield and David Sokal Preston. So that will be very interesting. That's going to be on the Apocrypha. So keep all this in prayer. And we also have Matt Singleton. He's going to be doing a debate soon as well. So keep this in prayer. Thanks for joining us, guys. I'll play my little outro. And we'll see you again soon.